All right, we've got just a minute to go. And we'll get started here. All right, it's 4 o'clock. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you. Sorry we couldn't be in person. It was just a little scheduling conflict with some of our folks. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Vaughn. So I know, yeah, Vaughn, you should be able to share the screen now as well.
All righty. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
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 Great. All right. As Matthew said, I'm sorry we could not be there in person today. I have another meeting that starts at 7, and it was not going to be possible for me to be in both places, unfortunately. But we do want to schedule another meeting with you in about 2 weeks or so, if we can get a date set. We'll talk about that at the end of the meeting. Do not think we're going to have a super long meeting today. I'm not going to go into great detail on this since we're virtual, but wanted to get you oriented to what we're going to be talking about next, future land use map in particular, so that when we do meet in person, we can have a very thorough, well-informed discussion about it. Just to start things off, and again with the welcome, just wanted to recap our growth management workshops that we held previously. We had good turnout. Wish there had been a few more folks. We had really nice weather, especially on that Saturday. And I think some folks chose to do some other things besides hang out with me in the Civic Center there. But we had very good discussions with those that did come, and I think the people that did attend got a lot out of it. But going forward, I think we'll be able to probably have some different kinds of meetings for the wrap up of the plan. And Matthew and I have been discussing just some other outreach stuff. I'm planning on coming up there on the 2nd of July for your music in the park event, just to be available, have a table, have some handouts to try and get to more people that might not have been involved in the process. And so we want to do that just since we can have bigger groups of people around and talk to more people. We're going to try and do a little bit of that as we're unfortunately winding things down, but getting into the exciting part where we start talking about adoption fairly soon. So with those out of the way, let me just jump right in to future land use. Let me just go to the next slide. Let's have everything on there. So over the last little bit, we've been developing the future land use map. We took our growth management map that we worked on, and we took some information from the previous plan and some information we got through the planning process here with our surveys and just other stuff going on. And we developed a future land use map that I think will be a good guide for us moving forward. We've reviewed it with Matthew and Anna, and of course there are always some refinements that need to be made moving forward. We have 14 different land use classifications. That compares, there's really a total of 13 on the one that's currently adopted right now. This one adds a few and doesn't have the same type of overlays as that one did. But wanted to just introduce this to you tonight. We have this both as a PDF version that Matthew can have printed for you there at Town Hall. We also have it as an ArcGIS online map, so you can look at it on your computer as well and zoom in and see who owns which properties and what they're designated, et cetera. But so just wanted to take some time to orient this with you tonight, and we have a description, about 3 pages worth of description of the future land use categories that we'll have available for you as well. But I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my online map real quick to kind of kick things off here. So I can switch back and forth So starting with the town center future land use classification, this area here, it's a little bit different probably than on the current future land use map, but essentially it encompasses everything from Potter Drive up through the town hall campus and over to the church along Main Street, as well as the land fronting on Perry and Ganaway Streets. So the purpose of the town center future land use classification is essentially focused on Jamestown traditional downtown area extending along Main Street from Ragsdale Road to Guilford Road. It's intended to support and perpetuate the walkable mixed-use development pattern in the core of the town. Because downtown Jamestown serves as the economic, cultural, and civic heart of the community and includes a mix of businesses that cater to both residents and visitors to the community. The traditional development patterns in the town center have buildings constructed adjacent to the sidewalks to create an inviting atmosphere for pedestrians, while parking and service areas are located to the rear sides of buildings. New development in the town center complements the traditional development pattern and architectural styles found in downtown Jamestown, with masonry construction and buildings not exceeding 2 stories in height above grade. So basically encompassing the downtown area of Jamestown, we'd expect to see a fairly wide variety of business types allowed there, including vertically mixed-use development not exceeding 2 stories, as well as some more dense attached residential development like you see today on Ganaway Street. It doesn't really expand downtown very much beyond its current boundaries. I think that the current future land use map, the park, town hall, and the church were designated a little bit differently, but we really think they're included in downtown Jamestown, and so designated with that town center future land use category. So the commercial corridor is the next future land use category. It's probably the most intensive beside the industrial district. You see it's here along Gate City Boulevard, coming into town, going to Millis, down to Vickery Chapel Road, and then out at Business 85. We can zoom in on some of those areas as well. We're starting up here. The northern end of town, this was one of the designated growth areas here. This is the Harris Teeter Shopping Center. This is currently designated as industrial on your future land use map. It's a former industrial site. There's some industrial zoning currently in place along Gate City in this area. This is the only parcel that's annexed into town that has a self-storage on it. The intent of this would be really to facilitate larger scale redevelopment in this area. We don't think that industrial use is probably going to come back here, and so we designated the entire area as a cohesive commercial corridor, future land use. So this encompasses the Sheets, Public Shopping Center, Millis and Main, their land, Corey Corporation's land along here out of Guilford College Road. This was another one of our growth areas designated here, Guilford Vickery Chapel, where the bypass starts coming through town here and then out at Business 85. And so the commercial corridor, we really applied at strategic locations that are along and adjacent to the town's major transportation infrastructure. It's intended to accommodate the development of larger scale and auto-oriented commercial development, as well as higher density multifamily developments like we see in place there already. And although it's primarily located on the town's periphery, the quality of new development in the commercial corridor should reflect on the high quality architectural standards found in the core of town. I think the town has tried to apply through its zoning practices as those properties have been annexed. And you'll notice that we have included, as Matthew pointed out, that these properties are recently annexed into town, just beside Sheets in front of the GTCC training center up there. We've included those in the commercial corridor as well. Next, we have the West Main future land use classification. Basically everything from the edge of the town center future land use classification going out Main Street to the periphery, to the edge of town where you border High Point there. The West Main future land use classification is applied to the majority of the land along West Main Street, going basically town center again to the High Point city limits. It's intended to accommodate a wide variety of low to moderate intensity uses, including offices, civic uses, attached residential development, and small format retail stores. along this traditionally mixed use corridor, we know from our experience on West Main Street, it's not a jumble of things, but there's something here and something there, and they're not exactly alike in terms of use in general. With the majority of the parcels in that area located in the Jamestown National Register District, new development will have to be sensitive to the rich historical context of the area and utilize development styles that blend well with the unique character of the West Main corridor. And again, just zooming in on that area. See it starting here, adjacent to the town center designation. These are generally in residential use now. There's at least one that's not. This is the condo development back off Main Street. We get over here to the Mendenhall Plantation. And then as we get into more institutional development out this way, including some attached residential, some offices, some smaller scale retail, the old shopping center out here. But really, there's not a consistent type of use along Main Street that's really all commercial in nature, all lower intensity office in nature. It tends to change fairly frequently as you go along the corridor out towards Penny Road. And so we think that a future land use classification that's reflective of the current nature of it, because there are some historic homes out that way that we don't expect to change necessarily. There's been some multifamily or attached residential approved to that area. There's some lower intensity office and medical uses, but there's also, as you get out towards the shopping center and out towards Penny Road, some regular general retail type uses. We think it all fits together. West Main Street's really a unique area of Jamestown. It was really the first kind of suburban commercial area in town as the town was growing. But it also includes things, again, like the Mendenhall Plantation, which have their own unique character and don't really intend for them to change. So that's the West Main future land use classification. Did not think it really did, it didn't really warrant the same kind of commercial corridor, general commercial designation as those areas on the bypass, and it's not really part of town center either. And so this is only the third of the kind of more general accommodating of retail businesses along with other types of uses that we have. Next in line, we have two areas on the future land use map designated as business park. Here by the railroad and also here off of West Main Street. So these areas are currently both designated on the future land use map and zoned industrial. So it's here Hillstone Drive as well as Wade Street. And as we were looking at the future land use map and looking at the zoning regulations and the types of uses that are allowed, it didn't really seem that those two streets in particular are really congruent with those industrial land use classifications or regulations that we have for those larger properties. And so I thought business park might not be the name that we call it in the end, but needed something a little bit different to call them. And if the nature of, you go down to Hillstone, you see the buildings that are there and the uses that are in them. It's not really industrial. I mean, somebody might be fabricating something in there. But it's much smaller scale. There's, I think a beauty supply business, the sheriff's office is back there. So there's some service type use, wholesalers, things like that I think can easily exist with a small scale fabricator of things and things of that nature. But you don't really want retail use in there or strict, that generates a lot of business because the streets aren't really configured for that and the businesses aren't really configured for that in terms of parking. But you also don't want to even imply that you're going to accommodate something that might have the kinds of impacts or generate the kind of truck traffic that larger scale industrial businesses might have. Wade Street's a little bit different than that, but looking at it some more, it's more similar to Hillstone than it is to the larger individual industrial uses. You're not really going to have the type of manufacturing going on Wade Street. The buildings don't really lend themselves to it in that larger scale. Traffic and access are a bit of an issue there as well. There's some environmental issues on some of the properties with floodplain. I actually see Wade Street as an opportunity for the town to have a more transitional type of area, the kind of place where something more customer facing might evolve over time, not 7 days a week, but something that might be open on the weekends for customers. but that smaller scale, lower intensity type of environment. So basically said that, it's intended to accommodate a variety of small to mid-sized commercial, service, and low intensity assembly, warehousing, and manufacturing uses that create low volumes of customer visits, low amounts of truck traffic, and few, if any, off-site environmental impacts. And so within these areas, the town seeks to preserve opportunities for smaller business enterprises to make Jamestown their home and support a diverse economic climate. So you need a place for this type of stuff to go. You don't necessarily want it on Main Street, but in these areas, you also don't want more intensive, larger scale development to occur either that might not be as congruent with adjacent residents. So we have a lot of residential development backing up to some of these areas. Next on the list here, we have the industrial future land use classification. So here along the railroad, up here on Gate City, beside GTC's and the Memorial Park, out here off of Scientific, and then at the Flowers Bakery. So these are all our more traditional, larger scale, more intensive, what we would tend to consider to be manufacturing and industrial uses versus the smaller scale uses that we have. So here we see again along the railroad, coming through town here off of Scientific, the Flowers Bakery, down here, Harvey Road, going back to Business 85, some big furniture distributors down here, and then up at Gate City. And so for industrial land use classification, we've applied that to the traditional legacy industrial areas of Jamestown, primarily along the railroad line, but also in those other areas we pointed out. It's intended to accommodate the ongoing use, development, and redevelopment of larger scale manufacturing enterprises in areas where the existing development context and heavy infrastructure, that water, sewer, rail, gas, roads, et cetera, is well suited for such uses. Uses in these areas, while larger in scale and heavier intensity than those found in the business park, classification should create minimal levels of external impact to the surrounding community to ensure their compatibility with the greater Jamestown community. The current future land use plan, talks about that. The industrial areas is, areas where you want to, attract environmentally friendly uses. I don't disagree with that. The uses that are there, kind of there, hopefully to stay in some respects, so that we don't, create derelict or unusable industrial sites. So we want to accommodate what's there to the extent practical. We wouldn't want anything replacing them to create more of an impact on the community as a whole than we see today. The next future land use classification, it's a little bit unique. We didn't have this one or anything like it really in the old, in the current comprehensive plan. We'll call it the Mill District, and we've applied that to the area around Oakdale Mill. We'll zoom in on that. So basically extending from the bypass back down to Harvey Road. This does not include the parcel that's across the Deep River from Oakdale, even though it was once part of the development. But basically applied that to the former Oakdale cotton mill property and surrounding parcels that were part of the original mill village. Excuse me. The intent of this classification is to foster the preservation and revitalization of the mill and traditional mill village in a manner that both preserves the rich history of Oakdale while transitioning the mill village into a mixed-use development focused on the mill and spurring additional residential development on the property to support the revitalization effort. As this applies throughout the traditional mill village, it is expected that the non-residential portion of the revitalization project might extend into the remaining portion of the old mill village on the site, and perhaps into what we might construe to be a strolling district or something along those lines that encompasses areas currently in residential use along Oakdale Road as well. And so that would assume the revitalization of the mill into something new and exciting with lots of commercial potential uses in there. Who knows? Potentially the use of the mill village itself, maybe not as residences, maybe their reuse as small scale artists, galleries or something along that nature, craftsman shops, potentially having a newer residential development to support what's going on here in the northern part of the property, a cluster development, kind of like you see in other areas along the Deep River. And then the properties up along Oakdale Road, potentially those transitioning into non-residential use as well, of course, up to the property owners there. but having that as kind of an integrated development where you could walk from downtown Jamestown on your new sidewalk that's still coming, and walk into a mill district that leads you into the mill property itself, but also has some new residential development supporting it, and existing residences as neighbors around it. So that is the intent of the mill district. Next, we have the campus district, primarily in the kind of northeastern part of town, also a little here on the west side where we have the rehab center. And so the campus district, zoom out to it. And extending.
Can I ask a quick question?
Please, go ahead.
So when you were, and this is probably more personal, maybe not the appropriate place, but when you were talking about the Oakdale area, what were you saying about the homes there? One of those homes happens to be mine, so I'm curious what you.
Saying that, assuming that this all occurs and Oakdale Mill is redeveloped and revitalized, and you have lots of activity going on here now. We have this great sidewalk connecting downtown to Oakdale, that if people were interested in this area, that if they wanted to transition the homes there that were part of the old Oakdale property into uses that were no longer residential, then that might create what we would call, basically a strolling district along Oakdale. Again, just an idea. It would have to undergo, there'd have to be considerable change to occur to make that happen. But what you see in some places like that is that you have homes that are adjacent to a larger redevelopment project like that might be centered on a non-residential use like a mill, and then surrounding residential areas then transition into supporting areas that might have a variety of uses that might turn into, again, things like artist galleries, small shops, who knows what it might be. But that's really just considering the ability or potential for creating that type of district that would encompass all of Oakdale down there. And if that's a bad idea, you need to let me know.
So are we saying then that those of us that own property there would be asked by the town to sell it?
That would be up to, first would come redevelopment, then would come success on Oakdale property itself. And then if that were successful, then if the town wanted to consider proposals by persons who resided there that they would like to rezone their property to accommodate non-residential use, then whether it's saying that that would be something long-term that the town of Jamestown might consider to create an integrated district of businesses along Oakdale Road in support of the Mill Village redevelopment. Not that you would be asked to sell anything by the town. Somebody might come and offer you money for your property, but the town would not be asking you to do that.
Okay.
So the campus district, of course, Jamestown is home to a number of fairly large institutional uses for a community of its size, the most notable among those being GTCC. In the ETJ, also we have the Guilford Memorial Park, which is a fairly significant amount of land. GTCC, of course, goes on to both sides of Guilford College Road now. We also have the Ragsdale campus, other school campus. The elementary campus downtown, we put that as part of the town center, just because we thought that it really fit more in terms of its style with town center than being a campus. Most of these others contain multiple types of, or multiple uses on the multiple buildings. And then extending over here to the rehab center, this and the land around it's currently zoned industrial, so that would be a change. And then over here at Merrifield, they own all but one of these, I believe. but they're actually in the process, Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong, but of expanding out onto Penny Road in this area. So that basically takes into account what's adjacent in High Point, not in Jamestown, but they are expanding their presence into Jamestown with that. And so the campus future land use classification supplied throughout the town, a number of locations, and primarily to the large civic, educational, institutional uses that are located in Jamestown. And its intent is to accommodate the use and growth of these important uses in the community in a responsible manner that is complementary of Jamestown traditional development patterns. So we want these uses to be complementary in their scale, in their architecture, et cetera. They're here. They're probably not going anywhere. Probably a bad thing for any of them to go anywhere. But we want them to be responsible neighbors. We want to also accommodate them in a reasonable manner, since they do contribute so much to the community. And Jamestown can take some pride in being able to host things that are so important to Guilford County as GTCC. All right. Next, we have a mixed use land use classification. We've applied that to one specific area in town. So this is focused out here, Harvey Road and the Jamestown bypass. It's not a lot of parcels, but it's a decent amount of acreage. If you remember, this is one of our growth areas when we did our growth management discussions. This, along with the Johnson property, were probably the two highest rated in terms of what we thought development pressure and development potential. The mixed use land use classification, so we applied it exclusively to this area adjacent to the intersection of the bypass and Harvey Road. The intent of this is to facilitate the development of these key properties with a mixture of smaller scale and lower intensity convenience retail, service, and office uses in proximity to the bypass intersection, along with a mixture of a wide range of housing types and larger integrated development in this prime growth area. In general, we say that non-residential uses should be focused on the frontages of Harvey Road and the bypass, generally limited to that area, while residential development should represent the majority of the development that takes place here and occupy the interior of these parcels, including going back along the bypass towards the interior. The current future land use map that's been adopted basically takes this area here where we see one of our biggest changes, basically made an arc of commercial designation through here. We thought that was probably a little bit ambitious, probably didn't reflect reality now, since so much of that has taken place up on the Gate City Boulevard portions of the corridor coming into town. We think it's more likely to occur out here in the exterior areas, anything larger scale commercial that does occur in addition to what's already taken place. And so we think that given the traffic capacity of Harvey Road, and just given the needs of the community, that we're probably likely to see some smaller scale convenience retail that might serve residential developments adjacent and around these areas, along with if someone would put in some doctor's offices or some general office development out there, we think it might be successful. Don't really see these areas as housing large shopping centers anymore, like might have been conceived back when the current plan was adopted. So we have transitioned these areas away from that commercial use. But we do intend to see, we do think some commercial use would be happening and immediately adjacent to these frontages, but we would anticipate the majority of this to be residential development. I think there's probably a pretty high demand for that now. Next, we have the village future land use category. Didn't really have a great name for it. That name might come with some connotations we may or may not want to associate with it at this point. But the reason we called it that, because we have, of course, applied it to the largest single development tract in Jamestown's planning jurisdiction. We see this property as basically one of the premier potential development tracts in the triad, and as such is expected to experience significant development pressure in the near future. Given its prominent size and location, the town is expecting it to be developed in a manner that creates an integrated, walkable, and mixed-use village that contains a wide range of housing options and neighborhood types focused on a village center. It would provide neighborhood-scale convenience retail, entertainment, and service uses that residents can easily access on foot or by bike. So with the abundance of land resources, it's expected that the future development of this tract will provide significant amounts of open space for both recreational use and for the preservation of critical habitats that exist on the property. And the quality of future development is expected to exceed what we call standard residential tract development and present a development pattern that is fully integrated in terms of quality of architecture throughout development, throughout the neighborhoods, and is consistent with the character and quality of development found throughout Jamestown. So that is the village future land use designation for our great friends, the Johnson property. We've had no discussions about in the last year at all. So we're finally going into this. Town residential is our next future land use classification. It's applied to 4 areas out here on Penny Road, back here behind the shopping center, original Forestdale, and then over here off of Oakdale Road. And so the town residential future land use classification, really these neighborhoods in Jamestown have a great deal more in common with each other in terms of their development type than do what we would consider to be the suburban residential areas. The town residential land use classification is intended to accommodate existing residential neighborhoods that were developed in Jamestown's traditional urban core, again, those areas along West Main Street, adjacent to downtown and along Oakdale Road. Excuse me. With their proximity to non-residential areas of town, careful consideration should be given to the nature of development on their periphery to ensure that it's compatible with the character of these older neighborhoods. Because of course, there's always in older neighborhoods, when you're adjacent to non-residential areas, there's always a temptation to encroach into them and introduce uses that may not be compatible along their edges. And so identifying these as areas where that's more likely to take place and ensuring that there are standards in place to preserve that, because we think those are pretty viable neighborhoods still and deserving of that protection. We wanted to make special note of them given their location. And then next we have the future land use classification, suburban residential, which is applied to the majority, it encompasses the largest amount of any of the future land use classifications. So it is the most prevalent of them that have been applied to the future land use map. This really encompasses the majority of the planned residential neighborhoods in the community outside of the town's traditional core. So although they're primarily developed in larger single-family residential subdivisions, this land use classification is also intended to accommodate lower intensity attached residential developments. We see some of those that have been developed in these areas, along with low intensity civic uses such as churches. We know that those exist throughout these areas as well. And where undeveloped land is included in this classification is intended to be developed in a manner similar to adjacent suburban residential development. And that's primarily with regard to areas like this. We have that kind of backs up to the Johnson farm, is separated from it by floodplain, but also comes, it's kind of an interesting situation. It's in DETJ. It's kind of part of development up here in Greensboro, but it's not because it's in the ETJ. It would theoretically take access through neighboring developments. There, I think have been maybe some interest over the years in developing these. Don't really expect for it to stand as separate tracts forever. And so if it does develop, it theoretically could be on town utilities and would likely be developed in a manner similar to what's adjacent to it. Same would go for areas like this that really have the horse farm on it, but might present a development opportunity. It might not be single family, but it might be attached residential like we see in some other parts of the suburban residential areas. Next, we have the Deep River residential land use classifications. I see it here in Harvey Road, going back to Oakdale, and then along Guilford College Road as well. Just zooming in on some of those areas. So it encompasses everything ranging from these areas like over here on Harvey, that are really outside of current utility service areas, larger lots, more rural. Going back up Oakdale again, larger lots, kind of rural in between town and the bypass in Oakdale. We also have in there these more like cluster residential developments that have taken place in this area. And so it's intended primarily for lands that are in the critical watershed area. Most of this is in the critical watershed area, including these newer residential developments. So where utilities are present, like we have here and here, what we would do is expect cluster conservation style residential development would be most prevalent in those areas, given the impervious surface limitations in the critical watershed area. And outside of the areas served by municipal utilities, it's expected that when development or land subdivision does occur, it would be larger lot, rural style development that would be taking access from existing roads. So we don't really anticipate in areas that really don't have access to sewer now, in particular, to see much appreciable development. Some of these areas that are closer to town, we would probably expect something to happen here that would be very similar to this or this. But we see we also go back up here because, interestingly, these parcels here and on the west side of Guilford College Road, still within the critical watershed area, and so we would anticipate that any use or redevelopment, new development coming in these areas would be more similar to what's going on south of town in the Deep River area than we would as opposed to suburban residential areas. We think that cluster development would probably be more likely given the watershed limitations here. And these would be more like what we'd see out on Harvey Road in terms of just staying primarily single family larger lot residences on Guilford College Road. Next to last, we have the estate residential future land use classification. So this really encompasses the larger residential tracts that are essentially basically in the middle of town, adjacent to the town center area. But due to a variety of factors, some environmental constraints over here, just the historic nature of some of those properties, we don't really anticipate having larger scale residential development take place. There's been some subdivision of land that's taken place, but larger lots, if that occurs in the future, that's what we would probably think might happen. It's very nice land in there, very scenic, to accommodate some very nice new large homes on larger lots in that area, but we really don't anticipate major residential development. We'd identify it as a potential growth area in here, but looking more at the environmental constraints, we see that it's probably going to be something similar, maybe not exactly, but something probably a little bit more similar to what we see here already. And then finally, the parks and open space category, we've applied that to both town park facilities, like over here off of East Fork, but as well as to areas that are either designated open space by their use for conservation easements. So the Piedmont Triad Regional Water Authority owns land here along the Deep River. We have other lands that were associated with residential development that are not going to be developed. We have other areas that would be very difficult to be developed, such as this tract along Guilford College Road that both has power lines on it, as well as some fairly inaccessible lands. And so we've designated those as parks and open space just to identify they're probably not going to see any kind of large scale development taking place on those. This tract again over here is potentially developable for a couple of houses maybe, but has pretty significant floodplain on it in there. It's also some access limitations. So I'd be happy to take any questions about this. We're going to send you a PDF of this map. We'll send you a PDF of the future land use classifications. We're going to send you a link to the online GIS of this so you can zoom around the map as well. And what I'd like to do, again, happy to answer any questions about this now. I know it's kind of like a fire hose at the moment, but for y'all to take some time over the next couple weeks before our next meeting and look at it, think about it, and at our next meeting, which will be in person, we can spread out some larger versions of this map with us, have it up on the computer as well to look at anything we need to look at, and then have some conversations about it before we begin integrating it, do some refinement before we begin integrating it into the plan.
Vaughn, this is Martha.
Yes.
How are you?
Good.
Yeah, I would definitely, I wish we could have had the map and the zoning, the land use classifications or descriptions prior to the meeting. We could have a little more knowledge and asking questions. But the one thing that popped out to me, made me think about for the category of business park, and you talked about Wade Street.
Yeah.
I just remember us having conversations about there at the beginning of Wade Street at West Main, is there being possibly a place for a put-in for a canoe or a kayak, because we have talked about the Deep River walking trails and the paddle trails. So I don't know if that needs to somehow be brought out or that be part of the discussion, because when you say business park, that doesn't sound like anything of an environmental nature where you would be having that kind of a use.
Yeah, so we have this parcel here at the corner of Wade and West Main designated as parks and open space. I think the entire parcel has floodplain on it. And then this parcel also has a fairly significant amount of floodplain on it. I don't know which of these you were thinking would be a place where I think that this one might have been in consideration for that in the past. So we took that from the previous plan. We did look at the current future land use map as we were doing this, to, try and make sure that we were keeping all the good ideas that are in there in place. And so we would, we try to be this is parcel based, so we try and be as discreet as possible in terms of, well, this parcel has these characters. And so although Wade Street back behind that would be business park, we do see the opportunity, especially with its adjacency to the Deep River, again, for this to maybe transition into something that might be a little bit more customer facing on weekends or something like that. When people are out here recreating on the Deep River, there might be some businesses that
was the hope, that if that were to happen, then the uses that come on down Wade Street might lend itself more to environmental recreation. It would that whole area.
Right.
Yeah, the river's there, so it's possible when you're talking about future. Sure that was still a concept that was in there.
Definitely. No, I think that's a great idea.
And again, like I say, I look forward to getting this map and getting your descriptions of these use classifications and studying them. Then I'm sure I'll have more questions.
Yeah. So that's the intent. I just wanted to kind of go over it with you today, so that we weren't just giving you something in isolation. We had a chance to explain things a little bit. That way, when we meet next time, we can have a nice, thorough discussion. Everybody's had at least a preliminary introduction to the map. So, if anybody else has any questions, happy to answer them now. Just had a couple more things not related to the future land use map that I wanted to talk to you about today, and we can talk about them some more as well at our next meeting. Some other concepts we've been working on, but before we move on, are there any more questions today, or are we gonna?
I had a question, especially the one that's called the Village.
Yeah.
I know this is a draft, but that was supposedly a PUD area, or is a PUD, potentially a PUD area. But why is it called Village? Because it seems to contrast too much or be separate from the town of Jamestown when you're talking about a parcel that will be a village. I just don't think it connects the town of Jamestown very well, just the verbiage there that we're using. We seem to be presented with this without seeing it ahead of time. I agree with Martha for us to think about it and think about our own, have our own thoughts. And I know we're going to meet again. But I just would like to say, I hope that the steering committee is participating and interacting as well as we should with how this draft is going to go forward. And my concern would be one Martha had also, but that huge parcel, is that going to turn into something that's separate from Jamestown? And the connotation of village would lend itself to that. That's my concern, but I guess the name itself. And that's it.
Yeah, and so just briefly, we won't spend a lot of time. So really looking at something of that size, and the most likely path for a developer would be to, and the way to be able to do it responsibly would be to integrate, maybe an integrated development that would include both residential and non-residential use, and in a walkable environment. And it would not be downtown Jamestown, because nothing's going to be downtown Jamestown. But the first measure, I think, is that it's integrated with it, well integrated with itself, and not a hodgepodge of just random stuff that's slapped across the landscape. And I think that's part of the responsible development of any property. But given its size, and also taking into consideration its integration with what's around it, right? Because it's going to have to be respectful of what's adjacent to it now. And again, is the word right? I don't know. I think that in the description, we talk about it being a community of neighborhoods, not a neighborhood, right? Because it's going to have probably different styles and contexts within it. And centered on something that's a focal point for that area of development, just like West Main Street. You kind of look towards West Main Street, you look at Oakdale, Mill Village, and it's kind of centered on Oakdale, or it was. All of which are part of Jamestown and not something separate from it. I don't envision a scenario in which that property is developed not in Jamestown, and the people that reside there are not residents of Jamestown. And I think we need to emphasize that as part of this process, because they certainly will be. Part of this is coming up with the right names for things. And so if people have great ideas for how to characterize that, and I thought about some things that, incorporated the name Jamestown X into it, Jamestown North. Or go ahead, Martha.
Could you read the description of the village classification again?
Sure. I'll just start from the beginning. The village future land use classification is applied to the largest single development tract in Jamestown's planning jurisdiction. As one of the premier potential development tracts in the triad, this property is expected to experience significant development pressure in the near future. Given the size and prominent location of this tract, the town is expecting it to be developed in a manner that creates an integrated, walkable, and mixed-use village that contains a wide range of housing options and neighborhood types focused on a village center that provides neighborhood-scale convenience retail, entertainment, and service uses that residents can easily access on foot or by bike. With the abundance of land resources, it is expected that the future development of this tract will provide significant amounts of open space for both recreational use and for the preservation of critical habitats that exist on the property. The quality of future development is expected to exceed standard residential tract development and present a development pattern that is fully integrated in terms of the quality of architecture throughout the neighborhoods that is consistent with the character and quality of development found throughout Jamestown.
Okay.
That needs a little work, but
I think all of these are, it's a new concept. It's the same language, new concept on all of it. So I know I'm going to have to study it, and we'll certainly look forward to in person having a meeting.
yeah. And so if we recall the the current future land use map designates that both as suburban residential and traditional neighborhood development. It's kind of a mixture of two different things coming together at the same time, which could be confusing in some ways as people are looking at it. And so, you know, of course, we need of everything needs to have the proper classification, but this is probably the one that's going to be most preeminent in people's minds as we are looking at the comprehensive plan as a whole. It's going to be of great interest as to, well, what are you going to do with that? And hopefully we can come up with a description and nomenclature for it that are reflective of the community's desires.
So in essence, we're aware of the fact that that property is going to be developed. I mean, there's no sense dancing around. It's going to be developed. We just need to be able to label it right and be able to have input into what it becomes.
Right, and it's communicating both with residents in the community as well as communicating with potential developers of the property as to what the town of Jamestown expects to occur there.
But we're going to develop it. I mean, somebody is going to develop that property. And
I would imagine so. I would imagine so. Other big points, clarifications, questions before we move on? All right. So we'll get this to you. PDF and the online GIS link and the description so y'all can start taking a look at it. Let me try this again. Let me stop sharing my screen for 1 second to try and
I'm gonna mute you for 1 second, Vaughn. While he's working on that, we are looking tentatively at July the 13th. That's a Tuesday evening for our next meeting. It'll be in the Civic Center at 4 p.m. in person. So just wanted to get that out there while he's working on this computer there. Vaughn, I'll leave it open for you when you're ready.
all right. I think we're back. My PowerPoint presentation was being obstinate. Sorry about that. So another couple of things we wanted to talk with you about today, some things we've been working on, discussing with staff and doing some internal work on here as we're developing concepts are some Main Street corridor improvements. These are some things that came out of primarily our downtown workshops. We've been working on a little bit more, just coming up with some ideas. And so have a few things wanted to share with you about some things we're going to be talking about more in the plan about the Main Street corridor, essentially from Dillon up to Guilford Road as the area we focused on. A couple things in this section. First, reducing the speed limit. We all, of course, know that the bypass is expected to draw the majority of pass-through traffic off of Main Street in the heart of town, which would then open up the opportunity for there to be a reduction in the speed limit. DOT has been hesitant to that because they see it as a primary thoroughfare between High Point and Greensboro now. With that change in the bypass opening in the relatively near future, we would see this as being more of a local street serving the local community and the local businesses along it, which would give us an opportunity to make it more pedestrian friendly. That in turn would create an opportunity to study other types of improvements to the roadway itself, such as the potential removal of the center turn lane that would be able to then accommodate wider sidewalks and bike lanes. There's some areas on there where sidewalks aren't necessarily the width that they might be to accommodate what we might want to see there in the future. And so those two things from a big picture perspective applying to the corridor as a whole. Talk about some of those in the plan. Also a sidewalk connection, and this has to do a little bit with what we're going to talk about in the next part. Sidewalk connection, there's a gap, of course, between Dillon Road and Oakdale Road on the east side of Main Street, where we don't have a connection through there. There's not developed land through there right now, but I think having a connection there is important. I've seen numerous people myself personally, the limited amount of time I spend in town, walking along in the shoulder of the road through there. So there's definitely, it attracts people to walking through there. So we think that additional sidewalk connection probably should be made through there. In conjunction with that, a couple of mid-block pedestrian crossings. One, perhaps the most important, we've talked about this a lot on the walking tour, is having just the amount of cross back and forth traffic in this area on Main Street has been pretty significant in recent years. So providing a safe mid-block pedestrian connection in that area we think would be helpful, as well as one in the vicinity of the food line, just to get people across the street in that area as well if they so desire to do so. And also in the context of downtown, providing, in the context also of our extension of sidewalk out to Oakdale Mill, having a more formal, more accommodating, better pedestrian rail crossing on Oakdale Road. And then we've been batting around some concepts with staff a little bit. We've talked to some engineers about some potential options for the intersection of Guilford and Main Street, characterizing this as traffic management and pedestrian safety improvements. What we see there is a significant amount of speeding through the intersection. We see very wide pedestrian crossings across Guilford Road and as well as across Main Street. We see inadequate pedestrian signalization in certain respects. Our goals there would be A, to slow down traffic, B, with the goal then of reducing conflict points for vehicle crashes as well as pedestrian crashes, also shortening the distance to the extent possible between the different sidewalk edges there on the different sides of the street. So essentially creating a more narrow environment there, again, with the changeover on the bypass coming online. We think with the traffic volumes there, will probably be able to accommodate some sort of enhancement that would remove the current, would alter the current, three-way configuration of that intersection. We've looked at some things like modified roundabouts there. We've looked at realignment of the intersection into a four-way intersection, with Perry being a leg of that. And we've discussed some modified, non-standard type of roundabouts might come up as an option for that as we continue moving forward. And then also at the other end of Main Street, not really as a traffic improvement, but there are some downtown gateway enhancements. When we had our walking tours, we did a lot of discussions about providing more of a transition between the West Main corridor that's more suburban to rural in nature, really, as you're going down by the Deep River, and then into the urbanized portion of downtown. There would, of course, be some opportunities for gateway enhancements on the other end of Main Street, on the eastern end of Main Street as well, in conjunction with any kind of traffic management improvement or solutions that might be constructed there. So those were some quick discussion items we wanted just to make sure you were aware of that we were talking about on Main Street in the downtown area. And then just to let you know, we're working on a few other downtown design concepts. Just want to let you know where they are as we're moving forward toward getting the plan created. The first one is working on some development concepts and renderings for this property. This is Oakdale coming into Main Street. You've got the old dry cleaners, the gas station, and the screen printing place here. So I've been exploring some concepts about how to redevelop this property, or if somebody wanted to redevelop it as a single unit, what that might look like, and using the town's current development standards and the good downtown design principles. We've also been looking at ways to enhance this property along the railroad. We know there's been some discussions about some additional development taking place back here behind Black Dog. Of course, this is all single property. We actually had some discussions with the owner as we were doing our downtown walking tour, and they've indicated they might be open to some enhancements to this as basically a linear park to complement overall downtown development, maybe catalyze a few things elsewhere around here. But that would go along with the additional pedestrian connection between Oakdale and Dillon on this side of the road. So we've been looking at some ideas about how to both fit some parking in that area as well as turn it into basically a passive recreational space along the railroad through there. And then we've also been looking at this property. I think we understand that BB&T has maybe re-upped their lease and will become Truist there in the very near future. From an overall design concept, though, we were looking at this. I guess we could probably look at the bank up on the other end of Main Street in a similar way. But really, you have an entrance into an urban area, downtown area that's anchored at both ends by very suburban style architecture. So at least we're looking at ways to do a more urban style redevelopment of this tract. Who knows, maybe it'll spark somebody's interest. And they might want to build a new bank integrated into something larger. The idea would be to basically present a downtown face to the community instead of the more suburban bank face that you get when you're coming up Main Street from High Point, with buildings built close to the street here. A, that would provide a more urban context, but also B, help screen this very deep parking lot that we have here as well that doesn't really present necessarily the kind of image that we've agreed, I think, that people want to see for downtown Jamestown. So those, working on renderings for those three, as well as those Main Street corridor improvement concepts to be integrated in the plan. We'll be sharing those. So again, intent is to have another meeting in a couple of weeks. I think, Matthew, while I was messing around with my PowerPoint presentation, you discussed that. Is that correct?
Yes, tentatively we have it set July the 13th. That's a Tuesday at 4 p.m.
Well,
in the Civic Center.
Matt, I've got a 6 o'clock meeting that night.
We should be done well before that, right, Vaughn?
We should be.
Well, I'll have to leave, if we're not through. And I don't know, to me, got a lot we could talk about. So, but I'll be there, but I will have to leave to get to a 6 o'clock meeting, if that's the only time y'all can do it.
Anybody else? Conflicts? All right, we'll leave it on the 13th. Martha, we understand, and we'll take what Vaughn has done today as a good review. And if Vaughn, if you want to send me, if you don't mind sending me your PowerPoint and your write-ups, and I'll share them out with everybody. That way we can all be prepared. And if Martha wants to go first when we get there, that'd be great, just in the interest of her time.
Is my screen not being shared during that, Matthew?
No, that's right. It was not.
Well,
It is
I
now.
wish somebody would have told me.
Apologies, I didn't know that you were trying to do that.
Yeah, let me run back through these. Sorry, I was speaking into the void.
Yeah,
So
we were envisioning what you were saying.
yeah, just envisioning. Yeah, so this might make it a little bit more clear. So this is, talked about this area for speed limit reduction, removal of center turn. I wondered why that big 2 was up on my screen the whole time. This for the sidewalk connection between Oakdale Road and Dillon Road, for those who are doing obviously a great job visualizing that while I was sitting there talking into nothing. Here, mid-block crossings, improve pedestrian connection on Oakdale Road, the railroad, and then traffic management and pedestrian safety improvements here, and downtown gateway enhancements here on Main Street. And then we talked about the 3 areas. So this would be the Oakdale and Main redevelopment, gas station, dry cleaners, spray printing, development concept for that, as well as the property along the east side of Main Street by the railroad, and at the corner of Ragsdale and Main where the bank is. I'm sorry, I'm not good with technology apparently. We'll send that PowerPoint. We'll get that posted on the website as well. And we will get that map to you, and I will stop sharing mine. All right. So, Martha, what time do you think you'll have to leave on the 13th?
You're muted, Martha.
Probably 20 to 6.
Okay. Well, we will definitely let you go first.
Well, thank you.
So we'll get that map and the descriptions to you and the link for the online GIS so that you'll have plenty of time to review that before our next meeting. And glad we had a chance to talk. And if anybody's around on Friday evening, assume there's not thunderstorms, I'll be out at the Music in the Park, and I'll have a little handout to help people learn more about the comprehensive plan and what we've done to date and kind of where we'll be going with things in the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys ever so much. We will look forward to seeing you. Hopefully you can come out to Music in the Park.
Thank you.
Anything else before we adjourn? Very well.